Pat, the
Our
teacher
first
did
topic-
thank our regular attendees. Yeah, and then you came in.
Oh,
Our first topic in today's lesson, what are the questions? In Luke 9:18 through 25, once when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "The Christ of God." Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone, and he said, "The Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life." And then he said to them all, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit his very self?" If you think back when you were in school, and I know for some of us
that's
that's
hard
a
for me,
stretch,
but I'll try.
we were confronted most of the time when we took a test in school, regardless of the subject. We were usually confronted with a whole series of questions, and then we were expected to provide the answers to those questions. But I remember one time when my science teacher, who was a sadist, okay, he gave us a test that listed answers. And we were supposed to come up with the correct questions for each answer.
Karnak.
Now,
Karnak the Magnificent.
I'm not very good at science to begin with. You know, that was not my favorite subject at all. I believe it was physics. Because it was a whole lot more difficult to do that, to come up with questions for the answers than it was to just answer the questions. And I ended up getting an F. Well, whatever. Another thing I always hated in school was in math class. And let me tell you, I was a lot worse at math than I was at science. And I wasn't very good at science.
Mr. Pop.
No, I know. The correct answers to all the problems in the math book listed in the back of the book, right? You can always get all the right answers, but by themselves, those answers were meaningless. And, you know, I can hear the teacher now, "Brian, you've got to show all your work, so I know you understand what you're doing." So the answers only became significant and meaningful when it was shown how they were arrived at by resolving a specific problem. The teacher said that's the only way you learn. It's the only way you can grow in your understanding of math. And my quiet response was, "I don't give a darn whether I understand math or not. I hate it." It's not enough to know the answer. You have to understand the question. In the little piece of scripture we just read, Jesus is asking two questions. He asks them, who do the people say I am? And then he says, "Who do you say I am?" Now this takes place at one of the most crucial moments in Jesus' entire life. He was heading to Jerusalem. He knew what was waiting for him there. He knew he was going to die. And so he asked these two questions. You have to understand, these are critically important questions to Jesus. Okay? Jesus really needs to know if he's made a dent in anything. He needs to know he's done anything right. And he says, who do the people are saying? What do they say I am? And then he says, "Who do you say I am?" It was critical for him to know whether his disciples had any understanding at all, any realization at all of who he was. And so the disciples not only had to discover the answer to the question, but they had to discover what that answer really meant. Now, Peter's answer was certainly encouraging to Jesus, I'm sure. When Peter turns around and he says, "Sir, you are the anointed one of God." But there's still a huge lack of comprehension as to what was going on and what was going to happen. We know this from lots of previous sessions when we've talked about how far out left field the disciples seemed to be right to the bitter end. True, Jesus was God's Messiah. But the answer the disciples were sure of was wrong. They had it all figured wrong. The Messiah was going to die. That wasn't what was supposed to happen. The Messiah was supposed to, lead the people to victory over the Romans. There wasn't going to be any revolution like that. So the, quote, victory of Christ was incomprehensible to them. They just couldn't understand it. They couldn't get it. Well, James Moore says that the Houston Chronicle ran a story about a test given to some music students at an unidentified junior high school somewhere in Houston. And here are some of their interesting answers.
What was the question?
We don't know.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
You don't
We
get to
just
know
know
their-
what their answers are.
It's like my mind
Here's
is
what they
written.
said.
I didn't remember.
You can extrapolate the questions when you hear the answers, I think. Music sung by two people at the same time is called a duel. I know what a sextet is, but I'd rather not say. A xylophone is an instrument used mainly to illustrate the letter X.
I think that's probably true.
Dirges are music written to be played at sad, sad occasions, such as funerals, weddings, and the like. That's a good one, huh?
A wedding dirge.
Refrain means don't do it. A refrain in music is the part you better not try to sing. A virtuoso is a musician with real high morals. J.S. Bach died from 1750 to the present.
That's true.
Handel was half German, half Italian, and half English. He was rather large. Well, you can tell from the results of this music test that the right answers are important. But right questions are every bit as important. You have to get the right answers matched with the right questions and show that you understand the question. Nowhere is this more true than in our faith journey experience. I'm sure most of you have occasionally seen bumper stickers or posters,
Honk if
a
you
little
love
hell
Jesus.
button,
Is that it?
maybe even a
Yeah.
highway sign that says, Christ is the answer.
Yeah, I have seen that.
Well, as Christians, of course, we believe that is true. Christ is the answer, to be sure. Christ is God's revelation to us about what God is like and wants us to be like. That is what the word revelation means, I think, a disclosure, an unfolding, a revealing of some new meaning or understanding. But when we say Christ is the answer, it has to be more than just a religious cliche or some pious platitude. A more serious thinker would have to come back and ask, Christ may be the answer, but what's the question? After all, we've already agreed that an answer can only be relevant, meaningful for us if we can relate to the answer to the proper question. So, I would say to you, Christ is the answer, but what's the question?
Civilization. Civilization.
Civilization?
What is God's nature?
What is God's nature?
For, let's see, how do you get eternal life?
How do you get eternal life? What I'm saying is that if you have 20 people formulate a question, you're going to probably come up with 20 different questions. So, Christ is the answer. But what are the questions? There's a noted psychologist, Eric Erickson, who James Moore said was helpful here. He lists some developmental questions that every person asks, and every person tries to answer if that person is to become whole or mature. Christ came to bring us wholeness, to make us whole, the scriptures tell us. So, let's take a look at how Christ brings light and meaning and answers to 5 basic questions which everybody tries to find an answer to at some point. The first one is the question of identity.
Who am I?
Who am I? Who am I? The second one is a question of intimacy. Who am I in relation to others? The third is a question of faith. Why am I here? The fourth is a question of loyalty. To whom and to what will I be true? And the final is a question of vocation. What is my uniqueness or special calling? Let me tell you something. If you can answer all 5 of those questions thoroughly, you've got your act together pretty good. You are a whole person. And you know what? Those were the very same questions I think that the prodigal son grappled with during his nightmare experience. And they're the questions I really think that every person has to ask and answer before they can have a real satisfying, rewarding, fulfilling life. You have to struggle with those issues. Christ helps us to answer these questions, and his answer is good news. He tells us that we are the beloved and valued children of God. That's who I am. He tells us that God claims us as his children and loves us like the gracious Father in the prodigal son parable. And so we are all God's beloved children. That's how we relate to everybody else. Everybody else are brothers and sisters in the family. We are family, and we should live together in love and harmony with respect and understanding. And we're here, the purpose is, why are we here? We're here to share this good news that God cares for us and wants us to be caring. We are here to love God and love people. We are here to serve God and trust him and be loyal to him even when times are hard. You know, I cover this ground with teenagers every year or two when they come to class. And we talk about what's the main purpose of life. And inevitably one of the kids will say, be happy. And I'll tear that apart easy. I can rip that to shreds, no problem. They say, well, to be a success. Well, I can tear that apart easy. Well, to be healthy. Well, I can tear that apart. Everything they come up with can be ripped to shreds and say, all those things are temporary. None of those things will make it all the way through. There'll be times when you won't have those things, so, you know, and they get all nervous. And they say, well, what is the purpose? And I say, gee, I don't know. What do you think? Oh, they get so upset.
Mr. Fox!
Yeah. So, we're here to serve God and trust him, and we're here to discover our own unique and special way to help continue the ministry of love which Christ began. And I keep trying to tell the kids, you need to understand who you are. You need to know your strengths and weaknesses. You need to know what your talents and abilities are. And through all of that, you will begin to discover what God has planned for your life. That's how it works.
Can you say that in a public school these days?
No. I think in a public school you can
Just
talk to
keep
kids
God out of
about,
it.
you know, why am I here? What's the purpose of life and everything? But you can't start off into a faith, religious bent on the whole thing. But it certainly is important for kids, even in a completely sectarian environment, to still ask those kind of questions. Because
And I guess you could suggest that they try looking for a faith as an answer.
well, what we finally come down to with the kids is what we just talked about, You want to know what it's all about? You want to know who you are? You want to know what's your purpose? You want to know why you're alive? To serve God. If you accept that as the ultimate statement, then you've got purpose all the way through everything. Okay, anyway, so much for questions and answers. Nuts to that.
No, I thought it was very good.
Our last
Well,
topic.
you would.
Our last,
Actually, I think that's a good way to bring, if you're talking to people who are not Christians or do not have a faith, that's, with those questions, it's a good way to bring them into why they should.
yeah, it is. And the truth of the matter is, more than that, every human being reaches a point somewhere along their life where they start asking those questions. And that means that somewhere along the line, every human being realizes that they're missing something. They're empty. They just don't seem to, there's something wrong. And it's at that point that they are not only ready to hear, but they are also extremely vulnerable. And they can hear the entirely wrong thing and go the wrong way just as easily as the other. Any Tom, Dick, or Harry that comes along with some big philosophy of life can sweet talk them into anything. And they can go to cults or anything else. So I believe that God has purposely created in every human being an empty space for that very reason. Somewhere along the line, you look for a way to fill that space in the hope that you will search for and find the truth. And our job is to try to help people stay on the right track if we can. All right, the last topic. Life is much too short for pettiness.
By the way, Brian, when this class is over and I'm listening to the video, again, I'm going to take notes on all that and have a conversation with our kids based on this lesson. Thank you.
You're certainly welcome. Luke chapter 6, verses 27 through 38. But I tell you who hear me, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. If someone takes your cloak, do not stop him from taking your tunic. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back, and your reward will be great.
I think that's one of the most difficult scriptures to read and to try to understand. I mean, it's all true, but boy, is that hard to do.
Well, and, yeah, no wonder, I mean, are you supposed to, it sounds like you're just supposed to allow yourself to be walked over.
Yeah, that's what I've often thought too, that, well, come on. But it's always, that one's always been so difficult for
Yeah,
me
well,
to
nobody said it was
come to
easy to
grips
be a
with. I
Christian.
know, but boy, is it hard to do even one of those.
Jesus got walked all over.
I know he did.
People wiped their feet on him all the time.
I know. I have
He
to
never
remember
changed
that
his
in our
attitude.
situation too sometimes.
So, you know,
And it's hard.
well, there's two great facts about the Christian ethic from this particular passage that relates directly to pettiness. And the first one is that the Christian ethic has to be positive. In other words, the Christian ethic does not consist of not doing things. The Christian ethic consists of doing things. The golden rule, which was in that little passage, does not encourage us: what you do not wish to be done to yourself, do not do to anyone else. It simply says, do to others what you would like them to do to you. So it's all a matter of positive reciprocity. There is such a thing as
But the
that.
problem is, if you have Mosaic law as a basis for your journey, thou shalt not 10 times.
Right. And even worse than that, the old law, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and all those kind of things. But see, Jesus changes all of that. He even said, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you to love your neighbor. So, I mean, he's turning the whole thing around. It's one thing to prevent yourself from taking a certain action against somebody else. This person's made you mad, you're upset with this person, and you'd like to take a baseball bat and bang them over the head with it. But you don't. I mean, it's easy to control yourself that way. You don't retaliate that way. But it's a very different matter to go out of your way to do something for somebody else that you would want them to do to you. See, Jesus has turned everything the other way around. Secondly, the Christian ethic is based on the extra thing, okay? What kind of special grace is there in being just as nice as everybody else? And Jesus asks us the question, how much better are you than anybody else? I've had a couple neighbors in the past living next door to me. And I'm here to tell you, I was a lot better person than they were. But it is not our neighbor with whom we are supposed to be comparing ourselves. I come out looking pretty good compared to some of my neighbors. You probably all fare pretty well compared to some of your neighbors. But we're supposed to compare ourselves with Christ. And when we do that, we come out looking really bad. we fail miserably. So Jesus is saying, what good does it do to be, just as nice as the other person? What good does it do just to do what they do? He says, you have to be better than that. It is godlike behavior that we're supposed to strive for and not tolerate pettiness to either friend or foe. James Moore says, pettiness is a spiritual cancer. To be petty, according to Webster's dictionary, is to be small in nature, trifling, mean, and ungenerous. And he says that pettiness cuts us off from God. It cuts us off from other people. And it cuts us off from the church. There was a man who was a fine singer. Had an excellent tenor voice, but he has not sung in church for over 20 years. Some 23 years ago, he was very active in the church's music program. He sang in the choir. In fact, he was the church's main soloist. But then he went to a church convention in New York City, and he discovered that some of the largest churches there pay their choir members. So when he returned home, he gave his church an ultimatum.
How about that, Pat?
Pay me, or I quit the
Try it
choir.
out.
Ideas.
Yeah, he said, pay me or I quit the choir. Well, the church declined his offer and he quit. The choir suffered his loss for a little while, but soon enough someone came along to take his place. Nobody is indispensable. The church rolls on, but that man has sulked for 23 years. He doesn't attend church regularly, and when he does, he sits in the congregation with bitterness written all over his face. He is mad most of the time. He is cynical and critical of the church, especially the music program. But people long ago quit listening to him. I mean, here's a guy who has wasted his talent, and he has wasted 23 years. Think of what he has missed while making himself miserable through pettiness. life is too short for littleness. Pettiness is not only a waste of time, but a waste of talent and a waste of energy. Well, there's a woman who quite suddenly quit the church. When the pastor asked her why, she said, "My sister passed away on September the 20th, and I didn't get a sympathy card from my Sunday school class until September 25th. I will never forgive the church or my Sunday school class for slighting me like that."
Sounds like somebody I know.
Yeah.
I wonder what Jesus would say to her.
I don't know.
I wonder what the Apostle Paul would say. I wonder what Mother Teresa would say to a person like this. My guess would be that they would say, "Oh, come on now. Life is too short for this kind of nonsense. Too short for littleness and pettiness." There was a couple who became upset with their church back in the early 1960s because of a social decision made by the administrative board.
Oh,
Oh dear.
Oh, they're
I
bad.
hope they just threw her out.
The couple became sick with bitterness and hostility. It was all they could ever talk about. At every meal, they fussed at the church. Every evening in the den, they harshly criticized the church and its leaders. They wrote hot letters, looked constantly for materials to use against the church, and made abusive speeches. And this went on for 5 years. And their children watched all of this and took it all in. Finally, their hostility spent. The couple decides to come back to the church. But they ran into something they had not expected. What do you think?
I hope they were welcomed.
Their children didn't want anything to do with the church,
Oh, yeah.
and this couple just couldn't understand why. For 5 years, they had denounced the church in front of their children because of one decision made by the administrative board, and inadvertently, they had taught their children to hate the church and to hate the people in the church. 5 years of bitterness. 5 years of pettiness.
Brian, I have a question though. What if somebody is doing what they should do, but they're so resentful and they're bitter and angry, such as, I don't know, taking care of someone who maybe they're enabling them, but you know, they think they're following Christ in the example that he gave, but in reality, they're turning bitter and angry.
Right.
In
And
spite
it happens all the time.
And they're truly doing what they think God wants them to do.
Right.
Well, I think it comes from your own self-centeredness. I mean, I think it comes from the kind of person you are. If you think, because you have to take care of your elderly mother, that you're doing what Christ wants you to do, but the whole time you're upset, it's because you're looking to yourself and not outwardly
Right.
to people who
Love,
need
love
help.
and caring
I
cannot
mean,
take
it's a
place
bit
without
different, and there are
sacrifice.
people who get very bitter when they take care
If
of
you're not willing to sacrifice yourself, then you're going to be angry. You're going to feel put upon. You have any idea how much I've given up to do this?
Yeah, see,
You have any
that's-
idea how many years I've had to do this? I just hate this. Well, that's not.
So don't
that's
do
not-
it.
Huh?
So don't
But
do
you
it.
have to do a lot of self-analysis along the way in order
oh,
to keep
you're
from
not
getting
kidding. You're
that.
not
Well, and
kidding.
also, the opposite side of that is when Brian's parents were in the Presbyterian, whatever it was called, what was it called, Brian? Not retirement home. There were people there that so overwhelmed you. I mean, this one couple I'll never forget. The woman could not have been 45, maybe 50, and had horrible Alzheimer's. Carried a teddy bear around in this wheelchair. Drooling. And her husband was by her side, took her to, when we had one of Mom's birthday parties, she came, he took her everywhere. He was the most patient, kind man, and he was like a revelation to me. I kept thinking, I mean, it was...
Every day wheeled her through the gardens, pointed out
Talked
the
to her
flowers,
and
talked to
she-
her lovingly and everything, and she was a vegetable.
Yeah, but it was the most beautiful thing of, and
Yeah, I
he
thought to
never
myself.
complained. I mean, never.
Boy.
You know.
And it was, and I sometimes when I think about things that are going on in, you think you're overburdened. I see this man and this lovely woman, with this teddy bear, and I think, oh my God, I don't know if I could do that.
I
You know-
couldn't. I
I
already
don't know if I
that.
could do that.
You look at this particular couple we just mentioned, 5 years of bitterness and
Yeah.
everything. How can you ever go back and undo that?
You can't.
Well, no, you can't make it right. I mean, it's over, it's done. Life is just too short for being little. It's dangerous, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of energy. And let me tell you something. There have been more than one instances of this right here in our church.
Right.
There have been some major situations here in our own beautiful congregation of pettiness, and I'm sure some of you are aware of some of those. It's just something that we have to guard against. And we have to guard against it as a church, we have to guard against it as individuals. You know, people who say, you know, we get our new church built. And a big debate comes up on the administrative board as to what color the carpet's going to be.
Oh,
That's exactly what I was thinking.
no, that happens. That's not a joke.
Yeah, and it's gonna happen.
And split the church right down the middle over the carpet color? You know,
Again, I think
how
it's your
petty can
self-centeredness.
you get?
I want my way, yeah.
It's just, you just can't do that. You just have to
If
back
you
off.
wanna know what Jesus would have said, he'd have said beige.
That's good, Dave.
Whatever. Anyway, it's an issue that we have to face all the time.
You do
Now,
have to guard against
Here's
it.
what to remember. Here's what to remember. Jesus says, do not condemn. Do not judge. Be merciful and be forgiving. And if you've campaigned for something in the church and you lose,
You lose.
you lose.
So what?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
how I feel.
You tell your brothers and
care what color
sisters,
the
more
carpet
power
is."
to you, I will support you
I
even
might
though I didn't
vote
agree
for a
with this.
color if
I
that's
know.
not the,
You know,
Yes, oh no.
And
It's
the only faith tradition I know of that does a fairly good job at that are the Quakers. I don't know if you've ever read anything about the way the Quakers do anything. And they, you know, they have their meetings. And if an issue comes up, they will openly debate it. People on both sides of the issue will debate what they think and everything. And they will try to come to a consensus of opinion. If there is no consensus, they don't take any action. They table it until they come back the next time. They tell people you go home and pray about it, you talk with each other about it, come back a couple weeks later, they still can't reach consensus, no decision is made, it's put off again. And they do not make the decision until there's consensus. Which means that some of the people who are opposed to it finally say, you know how I feel, I've been opposed to this, but I will not stand in the way of the congregation. We will forge ahead and I will support you. They're pretty good at that. It's called consensus, by the way. We tried to use some of that in our church in the early going, and if you'll recall, it was rather successful.
It should be, because the time takes care of a lot of things if people just think about it for a while.
That's right. So the bottom line to this whole thing about pettiness is this. With what measure you measure, it will be measured back to you again.
Yeah, I read that in there. That's
Yeah.
kind of scary.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you in 3 months.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Brian.
And I'm here to tell you that our
That's
class,
good, I can't, that would
as
be
it
a-
starts in September, is going to be a real revelation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Something early in the book, huh?
Didn't we skip a couple of at the end?
Yeah, he did.
From this lesson? Yeah.
There's one left,
Okay.
Oh,
and